Hi, everyone. Welcome to NIH's ARISE HIV Launch Challenge webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Our agenda today will be to provide an introduction of our panelists and then an overview of the challenge, along with how to enter and submit your solution. And then we will move into the Q&A. Please do submit your questions into the Q&A pod, which is at the bottom of your screen. We might not get to all of your questions today on today's webinar. For those that we don't cover, we will respond to them via the challenge page in the FAQ section or via an update. And we will also upload a recording of today's webinar for you to reference later. So starting off with introductions, I'm Jamie Elliott. I lead challenge design here at HeroX, and we are partnered with the NIH to administer this challenge. And I will now pass it over to the NIH for their introductions.
Thanks so much, Jamie, and good afternoon, good morning to those on the call. I'm really pleased to be here. My name is Julie Pullerwitz, and I'm a senior science advisor at the Office of AIDS Research at NIH, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Julio, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Giulio Berti. I'm also a member of the science team. I'm a senior science advisor at the Office of AIDS Research at NIH. Rachel?
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. My name is Rachel Stirk. I am also a senior science advisor at the Office of AIDS Research.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you all so much. We will now jump over to the presentation for today.
Thank you, Jamie. And so all three of us are senior science advisors. And today we're going to be talking about this challenge, which stands for Access, Delivery, Engagement, and Retention for Long-Acting HIV Prevention and Treatment in the United States. So we'll be talking about more details about it as we go through this overview, and then looking forward to checking in about any questions that you have for all of us and to follow up. So framing just a little bit around why this challenge and why now. As those on the webinar are likely aware, more than 1 million people are living with HIV in the United States. And the latest estimates are that people who could benefit from PrEP or pre-exposure prophylaxis number more than 2 million folks. And about 2/3 of people who are diagnosed with HIV are virally suppressed, meaning a third are not. And so that both has implications for their own health as well as implications for passing on and transmission and acquisition of HIV. And so long-acting products like bi-monthly injectable PrEP and treatment and emerging options dosed as infrequently as every 6 months are transformative tools. And so we're here to think about that today. The HIV prevention and treatment landscape is changing very fast, but we know that long-acting products and their real-world impact or applied settings depends on how well health systems providers and communities can actually deliver and sustain them. So the gap between what is biomedically possible and what's practically implementable is the problem that this challenge exists to solve and is the kernel and essence of implementation science. Turning to the next slide. So this challenge particularly targets 4 barriers, and the submitters are invited to address one or more of the following. One is access, making long-acting products affordable and available, especially for those current options haven't reached. Delivery, where effective, innovative service models to distribute and administer long-acting products in and beyond traditional settings is the focus. So the delivery of long-acting products. Engagement of communities and those who may be using products. So building the awareness, understanding, and trust to both to generate demand as well as promote awareness and interest for long-acting products. and then the retention of people by supporting adherence and sustained use to patients and individuals realizing the full benefit of prevention and treatment. Next slide, please. So what is the ARISE Launch Challenge? This is part of the ARISE-HIV program. It is a prize competition from the NIH Office of AIDS Research, represented here by myself and my two colleagues. And it's part of, as I mentioned, ARISE, which stands for Advancing Research in Implementation Science to End HIV. So that is the focus of ARISE, and this is an umbrella program where we're trying to accelerate research, catalyze, coordinate research around implementation science to end HIV. It rewards innovative, actionable ideas, this challenge, and then the plans to implement them for scaling up long-acting HIV prevention and treatment across real-world or applied settings in the US. In total, there's a $1 million prize purse across 2 different phases. So that's the total amount that is available to be awarded. And we'll be talking more about those phases in later on slides. Next slide, please. First, let's talk about who this challenge is for. This is open to 3 different types of submitters, a range, so individuals as well as teams of individuals, so it has a leader, this team, as well as entities, so a range, with who are not traditionally engaged in NIH-funded grants is something that we are particularly looking for, non-traditional partners. And when we talk about individuals, then you're competing on your own behalf. Teams are groups competing together, led by a team leader, and entities are organizations, institutions, or corporations led by a point of contact. So we're especially encouraging community-based organizations delivering HIV care and prevention on the ground, who may not be engaged in typical NIH-funded grants. But we're also interested in partnering and getting submissions from academic researchers and implementation scientists, including early career investigators. The emphasis is trying to reach out to partners that may not currently be funded by NIH. However, we're also very interested in cross-sector teams that bridge settings. The strongest ideas often combine implementation science expertise with lived on the ground HIV programming expertise. And so that's an example of a team or an entity that may well combine on the ground programming expertise as well as academic researcher expertise. There are a number of core eligibilities elements that you can see on the right. So individuals and team leaders do in fact need to be US citizens or permanent residents. The entities do in fact need to be incorporated and based in the US. And we don't accept submissions from a federal employee acting in that capacity. And adults are part of the eligibility criteria. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that there are 2 phases to this challenge. The phase 1 is a typical ideation kind of phase where we are rewarding ideas. The second phase rewards the plan to implement these ideas. And more specifically, the phase 1 that focuses on ideas, the submitter would be expected to submit a 3-page written proposal, concept note essentially, describing your idea. It's open to all 3, as we talked about, individuals, teams, and entities, and the expectation there will be up to 35 awards of $10,000 each for this phase. It will be judged on public health impact, innovation, and pragmatism, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a couple more slides. And in particular, we want to highlight that also that selected ideas are invited to the phase 2. And phase 2 focuses on the implementation plan. So phase 1, you're awarded for ideas, and then you're encouraged to develop a plan to implement those ideas. You'll be submitted a detailed implementation and evaluation plan. It is open to phase one winners only, and we anticipate there'll be up to 13 awards of $50,000 each. It'll be judged on the phase one criteria as well as the work plan quality and evaluation implementation science plan to evaluate the success of these innovative programming. We would also highlight that there'll be an option of capacity building support. So technical assistance offered during the beginning of phase two or in between phase one and phase two as some potential submitters are thinking about developing their plan so they are more ready to develop that plan. Next slide. Turning to how solvers will compete in phase one. So phase one, you would start with registering as an individual, team, or entity, and you have to certify agreement with the official rules. Next, you'll be submitting with one PDF proposal, which will talk about those three priorities, public health significance amongst them, talk about the target population or the audience, the approach. It will be a total of 3 pages, and the submissions are in English. Thirdly, we'll go through a screening process. HeroX, our collaborators here that Jamie represents, will be conducting an eligibility and completeness check before the content review begins. So looking at that, and then lastly, number 4, it'll go through a judging phase. So a technical review panel will be scoring submissions on impact, innovation, and pragmatism that I already mentioned, with attention to the overall portfolio balance. And what I mean by that is each will be scored and ranked, and then we will also be interested in having a balanced portfolio. Looking at, for example, the type of submitter, the proposed implementation sites, the range of settings that are proposed, which barriers are going to be highlighted in the program, and a focus on which specific populations. For example, is it focused on youth? Is it focused on adults writ large? So thinking about that balance. Next slide. Specifically, what judges are looking for, I mentioned the 3 criteria. Public health impact and significance, it being weighted at this point at 40% or nearly half. Does the idea address a real important barrier? So more specifically than access, something usually more like subsets, for example. Could it drive population level impact, not just individual level impact? So those are some of the types of questions that the judges will be looking for. Also interested in innovation. We talked about innovative and actionable. So here's the innovation or the novelty component. About a third, 35% weight, will be thinking about, does it bring a genuinely new approach or extend reach to populations that are underserved in general or by conventional daily regimens, for example, in terms of medication and long-acting options. So innovation and something we're thinking about. And then lastly, pragmatism. Another quarter, is there a persuasive case that this works in applied or real world conditions? And so that would be informed by community, patients, providers, and implementers themselves. So how realistic, how much is it taking into account the context of what it would consist of to actually implement this idea? Next slide. And then pretty much lastly, I wanted to share the key dates on a timeline. So this is our current plan where we launched on June 9th and the phase 1 submission became open. Submitters are due to submit by August 6th. That is the final deadline. We are anticipating after the judging component and phase in between to announce by September 28th or before the end of the US fiscal year. That is what we're aiming for up to those up to 35 ideas. And then those folks will be invited to move on to phase two. And we anticipate officially opening submissions very early in the new year, but in the last few months of the year, we'll make available that technical assistance that I was referring to, both from implementation scientists as well as, clinicians and program managers, where we're hoping to work with, again, this is voluntary, those groups who would like to submit for phase two. What is their explicit plan, both implementation and evaluation plan, to help refine that, and submissions can start being putting into the system beginning toward the beginning of January. We anticipate that submissions will close in February, and we will also be able to announce the winners in February. So we're working out some of the details there, but that is our current plan. So I am now going to turn over to my colleague Jamie at HeroX to talk about the specifics of registering, submitting, and asking questions about the challenge. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. All right, let's take a look at. So this is the challenge page. If you're not familiar, so herox.com/NIH ARISE-HIV launch. If you are not already following the challenge, please do, because that should be your first step, very easy step, and then you will get all updates associated with the challenge. The challenge page on HeroX is meant to be your one-stop shop for everything you need to be able to compete in the challenge. So all of the information is here in different tabs, and we'll walk through it now. So the summary tab goes through in detail what Julie just overviewed for you in those slides. You get an overview and background on the challenge and why NIH is running it, background on the problem that they are trying to solve in this innovative way. I'll zoom in a little bit here. What the opportunity is, and then it goes into the guidelines. So what is expected of you, what the structure of the challenge is, key dates for you, which Julie just walked through in the slides, the eligibility rules, which are very important for you to read and understand and make sure that you comply with, because by submitting to this challenge, you are acknowledging that you comply with all of these rules, and eligibility will be verified. Participation rules, and then the prizes. So these were overviewed in the slides a moment ago. They go into more detail here. The judging criteria. So Julie provided these at a high level, and so you will want to read the judging criteria closely. You will notice the judging criteria are formatted as questions. The reason for that is so that when you create your submission for phase one, you can test yourself against these questions to understand how well your submission answers these questions, because that is exactly what the reviewers and judges in this challenge will be doing with your submissions when they come in. Then there are instructions on how to enter. Submission requirements. Julie talked about a little bit about these, the 3.5-page submission, the 3-page submission, and what will happen in phase two. So a high-level overview of what will happen in phase two, and we will provide detailed phase two guidelines for those teams up to 35 that are selected for phase two. I did want to call out a reminder that any questions that you have about this challenge, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen, and we will field them after this section on the platform. When you're ready to solve this challenge, you click Solve this challenge either here or at the top of the page. And then on the HeroX platform, you can compete as an individual, or you can create a team or join a team. If you're looking to form a team, there's functionality on the platform to allow you to do that. I'm going to compete individually today. And then you can select Begin Entry to view the submission form. So you give your submission a title, you provide a short description about it, and you provide an answer to how you heard about this challenge. This is helpful for us in hosting future challenges. Then you get into the submission, and this is where you select what you're registering as, individual, team, or entity, which Julie mentioned in the slides, and more detail is provided in the guidelines. And then we ask some eligibility and logistical information about your team and organization. We confirm your eligibility here and your acceptance of all the rules. And then you get into the heart of your submission. So a publicly releasable abstract, this is where so you have up to 500 characters to provide an overview of your project and your plan and what you plan to do in phase two. But just note that this may be used in winner announcements, for example, so do not include any proprietary or sensitive information in it. Those 4 domains that Julie mentioned are listed here, so you can multi-select which domains your solution targets, and then describe your idea. So this is about a page here. Innovation and novelty, which is one of your judging criteria. What your actual implementation approach is, and what that would look like in phase 2 and possibly beyond. And then teams and partnerships. Lastly, a question about capacity and knowledge gaps. This is a question that helps us understand because it was mentioned in the slides. It's also mentioned in the guidelines that there is a certain level of support that will be offered to the up to 35 teams that get selected for phase 2. And it's helpful for the NIH to know if any of that support can be geared towards the gaps that exist. If trends start to form from this, then how we could tailor that better for the needs of that phase 2 cohort or group. This question is not scored against the judging criteria at all. So you can just put not applicable if you feel like you have no gaps at all, but there is a good amount of support that's being offered. So if there's anything you can think of that would help you in your phase 2 work, feel free to add that here. The submission form is editable up until August 6th, which is the deadline, August 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can come in and add information. You can click save and it will save it for later. You can even submit and come back in and reopen and edit your submission as long as you do that and resubmit before the deadline of August 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern. One other thing about the submission form is that it does carry formatting over. So if you're working on your submission in another document, if you have tables and figures and formatting, those things will carry over when you paste them over into the submission form. And that is it for the submission form. A couple other quick things about the platform. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so just a reminder, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A pod. The timeline is a relative timeline to where we are now. As you can see, August 6th, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm not in Eastern Time. 5 p.m. Eastern Time is that deadline. Updates. So if you are following the challenge, then you will receive an update and an email whenever a new update posts. So the most recent one, for example, is announcing this webinar. In the next few days, an update will be posted with the recording of today's webinar, and you will get an email about that if you're following the challenge. So please follow the challenge. And then lastly, the forum. This is where you can ask questions, find teammates, ask questions of fellow solvers, brainstorm solutions. This is monitored. And so any questions that you have, today's webinar is not your only opportunity to ask questions. You can ask questions anytime before the submission deadline, and we will respond to them, I think, within 1 to 2 business days, usually within 1 business day. And that is the HeroX platform. Right. So there's a question, where do we upload the 3 pages? The 3 pages is actually broken down in that submission form that I showed. So the different sections that I shared, so the public health significance and target population, innovation and novelty, these sections make up the 3 pages. There's a question about reference requirements and if references count towards word count totals. Um, they do. That's a great question. We can look into and discuss the possibility of adding a place for references to be added so that they don't count against your total submission length. We will respond to that question formally after today's webinar once we've had a chance to discuss, but it's a great question. Thank you for asking that. There's a question, is there a budget required? From my understanding, there is not. There is no field to ask for budget because the work that you're doing in phase 2 is to create a plan. Now, whether a budget would be a part of that plan in phase 2 is yet to be determined, but I'll turn the rest of that answer over to the NIH.
I don't know if either one of my colleagues would like to jump in, but I think the way you just described it, Jamie, is perfect. There is no requirement for phase 1. And we will, and the goal is a plan. So we're trying to still firm up like how long is the implementation plan? Is there requirements around that? How, what kind of scope are we talking about necessarily? And right now we're focused on ideas and no budget is required.
Okay.
But we have to think
Thank you
about
for
it being 50,000 for the budget and for the prize for phase 2, and thinking about what would happen next is something that submitters would want to think about as well in terms of the trajectory over time.
Great. Thanks. There's a question, will we have access to this webinar? Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and by early next week, it will be posted on the HeroX website under the updates section. Another question that I would like the NIH to think about, I'm not sure if we have an answer at this time. If the idea, so the submission from the solver, will require public health and Ryan White, will there be opportunities to present on that level for buy-in to roll out and implement the idea? Oh, sorry, Julie, you're on mute.
Julio, I feel like you have an answer to this one.
Uh, I think it needs a little more clarification. What do you mean by buy-in? It's
Right. If the person who asked that question, if you could elaborate on in the Q&A pod about what you mean by buy-in to implement the plan, is that? But sorry, can you elaborate on what you mean by buy-in as it relates to the idea requiring public health and Ryan White? Is that funding? So to be able to pitch for funding for the implementation of the plan?
And I actually had a third clarification question. When you said opportunities to present, do you mean opportunities to present
Right.
internally so that you can show that there is buy-in, or are you trying to say that you already have buy-in? Like so, um,
Okay. If there will be portions of the idea that need implemented and it would require support from other agencies. So I think I believe this is heading more towards the details of the plan and what the requirements of the plan in phase 2 would be, because the plan is about implementation, right? This is not a challenge where the implementation is actually occurring, but is a plan for beyond the challenge, what implementation could look like. Okay.
regardless. Um, what's the the buy-in here? We highly encourage the applicants, the solvers, to use this idea in grant applications. So if you feel strongly about this idea that you submitted here and you want to develop that into a grant application, we highly encourage you to do so.
Great. Another question, are administrative agencies that receive grant funding from DSHS, which may be DHHS, and HRSA eligible to apply? Please read the rules carefully about the use of federal funds, and because it is stated in the rules. And that question, if you are selected for award, will be asked again about use of federal funds for your solution, because you would be receiving a prize for this challenge. Anyone at the NIH have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. You're not supposed to be applying funds from federal agencies to complete this application. Isn't that
Federal
right?
funds that are intended for the same use,
That's right.
I believe. Right. Great. Another question, may I confirm that phase one does not require submission or signature by an institutional signing official? This is submitted by an applicant directly. That is correct. If you are an individual or if you are a team, and you have an idea and it's a very low barrier to entry with a three-page submission, you are welcome to submit. If you are applying on behalf of an organization and your organization has any rules or requirements about what you can submit on their behalf, please check on that. But there are no requirements of such for this challenge. Great. So there's a question, what if I'm developing my idea to launch before the end of the competition? So this is interesting. So we have this timeline, things, winners being selected by early spring of next year, late winter, early 2027. So in phase two, let's suppose a phase one team has won, goes through into phase two, and has now created their plan. It is a possibility that teams are already working on things like this. And so what if that is launched during phase two?
This isn't I mean, jump in anyone else. This is an award for the quality of the plan. If you're actually able to implement the plan with other funding, I think that you could still receive an award for how excellent your plan is. When you're saying before the end of the competition, you may be actually doing that work. We're also providing an opportunity for you to develop that plan so that you may go ahead to do that work afterward or apply to a grant, etc., more successfully. If you're already able to do that, that's probably good news. You can still receive an award for what your plan was.
I would also add one of the things that challenge competitions offer and provide is the opportunity to think about your project within the constraints or the confines of the challenge. So a lot of times with challenge competitions, teams, organizations are working on something in an adjacent space. And but what you are charged to do and challenged to do by submitting to the challenge is to think about your project within the rules and the judging criteria of this challenge. So you saw judging criteria today for phase one. There will be submission requirements and judging criteria that come out for phase two. So your plan likely cannot just be copied over from what you're working on to and win phase two. It's an assumption. But you would need to then think about your plan as it meets the criteria of this phase two for this challenge in order to win. Hope that's helpful. Another question. for the NIH. Over the past 2 years, there have been some concerns when using words in grant applications around race, sexual minorities, etc. Do we need to be mindful of those limitations for this challenge?
Julio, do you have a thought?
Uh,
I think I think we need to consult uh, internally before giving a final answer here.
Okay, great. So thank you. We will take that question offline and we will respond to it officially on the challenge page after today's webinar. We will write a response and put that out. Thank you. Okay. There are no other questions at this time, but we will hold here for a few minutes in case any more come in. Feel free to add your questions as you have them. Okay, at this time, we have not received any other questions in the Q&A panel. Um, as mentioned, this webinar is not your only opportunity to ask questions. This team and the HeroX team are available to you up until the deadline. The deadline is August 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern. Get your submissions in. Please go to the challenge page. Please follow the challenge to receive all updates. And this webinar will be posted up on the website by early next week at the latest. Those questions will be the questions that were not answered today will be posted as well. I can't guarantee the same timeline on those, but they will be posted with answers to them. And we really thank you all for joining today. And I'd really like to thank the NIH for hosting this challenge. This is incredibly important work and for taking the time with us today.
Again, thank you to everyone who joined, and thank you to Jamie and our colleagues. And we're looking forward to seeing the wonderful ideas that will be submitted that we could potentially in the future move forward with and highlight your good work.
Thank you all. Have a good
Thanks,
rest of your
everyone.
week.
Thanks again.